A very good afternoon to all of our listeners. My name is Boshaga, and once again, I'm your host at The Shout Show. Now, today I've got a very, very interesting guest here with us, and it is my humble privilege to introduce him to you. Today on the show, we've got Mr. Jon Fisher, and this is a very interesting session because I've actually, believe it or not, I've actually heard to Mr. Fisher's speech a couple of years back in the past. But at that time, I wasn't, you know, too aware of his works. But let me share with you a little bit about him. Jon is an incredible CEO of Silicon Valley. He is incredibly famous for many of his ventures, perhaps the first being his powerful commencement speech at the University of San Francisco School of Management, where he pushed on the values in becoming successful, not to forget family, and most importantly, to be comfortable and to keep pushing on to the parts that most people do not venture in. Besides that, Jon is also the CEO. He's best known for his work at CrowdOptic. He's the co-founder and inventor, and his past companies include founding Barossa, an enterprise software security company that developed the product known today as the Oracle's Adaptive Access Manager. Besides that, Jon was also the founder and CEO of NetClerk back in those days, and also AutoReach, which is part of AutoNation. Now, Mr. Jon is also the recipient of the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year award, and is an incredible inventor. As an engineer myself, I am incredibly overwhelmed. He has over 100 patents to his name globally, and I hope to get into that towards the end of the session. We've had a lot of engineers giving us questions on how exactly the thoughts come in founding a company, and as well as putting into engineering skills to become not only successful, but to change the world. So, Mr. Fisher, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, I'd like to start off with a little bit about yourself. It must be incredibly hard, to get to where you are today. I was hoping if you could just rewind the clock a little bit back to the time actually when you were giving the commencement speech. Did you at that time think of where you would be today? Is that something that was always at the back of your mind, or did things change a lot to how things happened?
Yeah, the commencement speech is for the University of San Francisco. Is actually delivered in St. Ignatius Church, which is at the top of the hill in San Francisco. It's an absolutely beautiful venue that I've visited often just to get some peace and some inspiration. And I actually visited the establishment, I thought, on the way to a Christmas cocktail party about 6 years before that commencement. It was the day, the evening that I found out that all those poor children were shot at the Sandy Hook school back east. And I thought going to a church would be a good move to sit down and contemplate that. And I actually ended up staying in the church for quite a few hours rather than attending that party. I was just in no mood to go to a party, as you and most of the world can imagine. And it was at that time that I actually envisioned giving a speech in that church. I wanted to share I think, a fundamental idea. And so to answer your question, not a lot has changed from that evening, from the moment I gave that speech and till now. And that is that I think our traditional definition of happiness, if you will, whether it's in the Valley, I've done business in Silicon Valley for 25 years, or any major place or anywhere whatsoever, I think that the definition has to be extended a bit. We are constantly motivated, socialized by financial interests, by venture capitalists, by other folks to be insanely great, to push the envelope, to build as fast as we can, or even condition this generation is to break things. Right, that's become the clarion call, and I just really have an issue with that. You come up with a good idea with a good team and you build a solid company. And I think a path of least resistance is to see that company acquired by one of the world's best companies. And then you, as an inventor and an engineer, you understand that you can see your invention go around the world that way. And I think a path of least resistance to living a happy and, if you want to call it, successful life is to not sacrifice your personal relationships, your family, your employees, your partners to that company vision. And I think it blends in. So that was what the speech was about, to say, bottom line, you can do very competitive things while still being a very nice, a very good person. And one of the ways I quantify that, to be very clear for your viewers, is, I sold a company, as you mentioned, to Oracle. I think they're the greatest enterprise software company in the history of the world. It did that at the height of Larry's power, who I think certainly at the time was, perhaps the greatest who ever lived at certain things. So I think that was very competitive. And, for not a lot of money raised and not a lot of broken eggs, we built a standalone product for them, and it's been used by now millions of people, of course, around the world. But simultaneously, in these 25 years, I've never so much as been a party to a lawsuit, not a defendant, not a plaintiff. Another way to quantify, you don't have to step on anyone's neck, to advance your cause, to build. So I think it's really the combination, just being competitive and also being a good person. That's especially acute these days when we're all forced to look inward, given the virus and the state of the world.
Right. And yeah, absolutely great insights there. Something that you mentioned a little bit about, constantly staying true to those values. I'm pretty sure, as you're going on to it, there's a lot of people who do not feel the same way, especially when you're working in similar teams. Most of them would prefer to take a product up to the next level, or perhaps to go towards a different way, prioritizing profit over family, so on and so forth. So how do you draw the line between how much to push for and how do you hold back? Is there a certain framework that you use? Do you quantify your time between both sides?
Yeah, I have a 10-year-old little girl. I have an 8-month-old bulldog. My wife and I have been together for 20 years, actually this month, married for 18 years this month. So, these people, including the bulldog, are good sounding boards. If you're doing something right, you can see it in their faces. If it's a constant battle, at home or abroad, and meaning that you can visibly see and sense that you're trading on these relationships in order to get going. I think that's a real problem. I mentioned in the speech that I'm some of the most successful people I know are divorced, and that's really
right. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a hallmark. Ellison himself. Ellison, I'm not sure if people note, I think he was a pretty good father. I don't know a lot about him personally, but I think he really, with his resources and everything, was really good to his kids. And look, I think that may be an ingredient to any person, no matter how successful they become, is, interestingly enough, the notion that we're socialized to think that these guys are modern day, Genghis Khans, and they conquer everything. But I think there has to be some sort of notion of the personal connection to make, the world recognizable, no matter how successful you are. But he has been divorced, I think it's 4 times, right? So,
yep.
There is that collateral damage. Elon Musk, I think, is divorced his second wife for the second time. That's Indeed. A little, I think that's when you're pushing it, right? And so the world needs people like that. They need people to absolutely push the envelope, and I said that in the speech as well. But for the rest of us, I think we can not have to jettison our personal lives or sacrifice quite as much to still make the contribution that we're meant to make.
Cool. And building on to that, sometimes there is a notion of what happiness actually is when businesses are being built. And I also want to jump into your idea in building up businesses and getting them so good to the point where they are sold to much bigger companies. There, what does happiness kind of mean? Is it the fact that you get to spend a lot more time to your family, or is it the fact that those babies, those businesses that you founded and you brought up, those being captured, the attentions being seeked, is that something that brings a lot more happiness into you?
Well, when you're architecting a business the way that we do, you're subordinating things without rationalizing, without making excuses, but you're subordinating things like profitability, for example, at least sometimes, to repeatability, to the fact that your business is going to have to be plugged in somewhere and multiplied almost instantly by 1,000 times. That's the definition of synergy, right? That's why you can sell a company doing X amount of revenue for 6 times the next year's revenue, because the massive acquirer is going to take your asset, plug it in, and make it much bigger by result. One of the first thing that I tell business school students is that you may want to and think you can change the world, and again, all power to you. But if you're doing something of value in a startup, you're probably going to have some pure play competitors. And if you have some competitors, one of those guys is going to get taken out by Oracle or Google or Apple or whomever it may be. And then you're going to be competing against that pure play plus their backer. And I don't know how to win, that competition. Meaning, I think there are a lot of intangibles and variables that go into massive success. And so I think the way that we're building as far as the definition of happiness is to engineer something that has some real value, some real repeatable value, but with the end goal in mind. And, I almost like to think of my family and those close around us in similar ways. I'm thinking about, God forbid if someone were to get sick, or if I was going to lose this person, thinking of the relationship with the conclusion in mind and trying to live every moment and every day. It's a cliche, but again, now more than ever. And I know people hear this and they're trying to really contextualize it. I don't want to sound obtuse, but it costs maybe $10,000 to get on a private plane if you want to rent one and fly in most states of the union. That's a lot of money, but that's not an unlimited amount of money. Same with a hotel room. For that amount of money as well, you can probably go and stay in most of the best hotel rooms in the country. So that's $20,000 to really travel like an absolute king. Do you really need $1 billion? I mean, do you really need $10 billion? And maybe it's one thing for people like me who haven't made that kind of money to throw rocks. I'm not saying necessarily that there's something so wrong with it, but in taking that private plane and staying in that hotel room, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know very many American cities these days where you can even go and have a nice dinner due to virus, due to civil unrest, due to weather conditions that are becoming increasingly unrecognizable. I'm in one of the most beautiful places on earth in Marin County, California, and 2 weeks out of the year now we have forced blackouts. Another 2 weeks, the air quality is too poor because of fire. The weather patterns are becoming more and more disruptive. You're having flooding. You can't get 30-year mortgages in some of the houses on the ocean. There's a reckoning happening. And so, the happiness is, I think, looking at what we're building, what we have, and instead of the ultimate prize of how much I can accumulate and how successful and maybe even how famous, one can become, instead looking at what we're doing with this, traditionally extending the definition that I said at the beginning of happiness, where we're looking at it a different way. We're really looking at the combination of our business and family intertwined a bit to make sure that one isn't jeopardized versus the other, but also that we're living in a recognizable way. And I also said that in the speech, that each student listening and each parent, anyone for that matter, my life should be recognizable to them. It should be, you can be happy in both your career and your family.
Totally agree with you on that one. And yeah, absolutely. Even over here in Indianapolis, there's no way you can go out and, speaking from the perspective of, going out and enjoying life outside, when the inside is not too stable, when you don't have love inside, it's difficult to find enjoyment anywhere for that matter. And a lot of kids these days, or I should say, startups, uh, after college students, they tend not to view the world in the same way. They try to pursue uh, they try to pursue into big startups. They try to pursue into high paying jobs, and they tend to sacrifice a lot of family time going on with that. Why do you think that's the case? Like, it also, on their perspective, it can be pretty hard because they've got to start making a name for themselves, and they've got to start supporting themselves, so paying off college debt and so on. So how can they start balancing their life and not being afraid of everyone else?
Yeah, if you're a new chief doing this and you're fundraising, you are raising money from funds and people with a vested interest to see you build largely companies in certain ways that may be counter to perhaps the philosophy that it seems you and I are espousing a bit. I mean, if you're a venture capitalist, and this has been since the beginning of the industry, you have 10 portfolio companies and you're betting only one is going to more than justify the other 9. And you're actually willing to jettison, depending on your charter, maybe 7, 8, maybe even 9 of them to find that one. So what happens to the rest of the portfolio in the horse race of being institutionalized, being socialized to build at a breakneck pace? I think one of the biggest reasons that people fail in this business is they're raising too much money. They lose control. They're not able to justify valuations and trajectories. The recent show Silicon Valley has some beautiful episodes on this that I would recommend that every one of your viewers watch. One on valuation, where the guy jettisons, he just explodes over the realization that he's raising too much money. But then my life, raising less money, I'm taking money from banks like Silicon Valley Bank and debt. I'm taking money from much smaller funds. My life is a little bit difficult too, because you're constantly your head to the glass institutionally. Sometimes there are lean years. Sometimes you're not as well capitalized as you'd like to be. So there are trade-offs as well. But it is my company. We are in control of it. We're building it in a way that is reasonable. Instead of taking in large part money from a tier 1 institution, I wouldn't mind taking money from the named partner of that institution. It's kind of like getting the milk without the cow. Often the Fortune 500 acquirer or partners do that to startups, but there's no reason why we startup entrepreneurs, inventors can also be tactically smart as well. Now I'm talking opportunistically. I have a lot of friends, funds, and friends who have invested with me for these all these years, but maybe the fund isn't the right fit, and so the partner is, and you can get all the intellectual capital and the knowledge, and partner can help when the time comes and all that. So they're different. Grass is always greener. Sometimes to be extremely well capitalized by the best in the business helps. But I find most of the time, to answer your question, I think some of the next generation and a lot of us all together are being pushed to build in a way that is nonsensical. And a lot of things can happen to make for a successful venture that are intangibles, and then we worship that outcome. And I guess that's part of life. But most often, right, most of these businesses fail anyway. And most often is, in order to get your financing, you have to have this Faustian bargain, if you will. You have to sell your soul a little bit and put yourself in a position where you must, and I'll make a clear point, be more successful than almost anyone in order to be successful. And what I mean by that is the average venture-backed startup is sold quarter after quarter, year after year, doesn't matter, for far less than $50 million. All right. Now, you say that to your audience and they don't think that that's a very big win. But if you own a lot of a company that you sell for $50 million and you can sell it a lot sooner than having to build a much larger company and having to do an IPO or having to do a much larger acquisition, there are different ways to skin a cat. But my bottom line point is, if most of the venture-backed companies are sold at that level, then how do you possibly raise an institutional round of 20, 30, 40, $50 million? That means you're betting your company is going to be more successful than on average all of successful venture-backed companies, and that's taking it your odds of success not just 1 in 10, but making it 1 in 100. And a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of students of mine have sent me a text saying, I just took 15 million from some name brand fund, and I smile with half my face, and the other half of my face I cringe, because that can go either way.
That makes sense, yeah. And not to mention the emotional stress it puts on to actually deliver those goals, I would imagine, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And building on to that, since you're in investing and building on funds onto the financing part, sometimes it can be hard to grow, especially during the initial stage without sufficient funding, and that may lead to decisions like receiving investments, even though those deals may not be entirely favorable in our favor. So how would you tackle those kind of incidents? Could you maybe share an example where you had to pitch and didn't really receive the investment that you wanted? Do you just hop on to the next?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, in my career, when I was first starting out, you're just starting to win. And then the back half of the career, presumably for many people, things are going better. So it's interesting. The back half of my career, I'm also a limited partner in a couple of different venture capital funds. So I get to see it on both sides of the table. And I think one thing is sometimes my opinion is asked by the other partners in the fund as an advisor, or sometimes I'm reading an update about certain funds and I'm digesting it of interest. But I can't say that I have an emotional connection as a limited partner to any of the funds and any of the portfolio companies in them, versus what I know about being the inventor and the entrepreneur and how unbelievably passionate and personal my particular venture is. So I found that in fundraising, the longer that my investors are with me, and also the perspective I get as an LP, I take it much less personally. I'll have an investor who I'm up, $2 million with in the last venture, who decides that, he can't participate in this venture. And 10 years ago, that might make me roll my eyes a little bit, but maybe there's been a divorce, maybe there's been sickness, maybe there's just the less of an appetite to want to participate. It's nothing personal. So I think fellow fundraisers could do a better job in trying to look through the lens of the institution and of the funding source, because it is, in their defense, their purview to make money. It's not that they just want to join something because they're civic minded and they want to see you and help you change the world. That gets stapled to pitches, and that's exciting if you're that passionate about it. And of course, if you have the opportunity to do that. But in the end, it's about making money. So I just got done in the last segment talking about how I think we're pushed too hard so that these institutions, these backers, can make money. If I see a proposal or a way to work with someone, I think it's actually rare that they want to give me more money than I want to work with. I mentioned the Silicon Valley episode and everything. I think that's rare, but you got to be careful about that. More that I think it's maybe a board seat is involved, and I can tell right away that this isn't going to be a good fit. Working with people that you've worked with for a long time, even friendships that you've been through, you've gone through the crucible together. When millions of dollars are at stake, or when your binary life and death is professional life and death is at stake, sometimes people do some crazy things. So it's kind of nice along the relationship side that I mentioned to bring your investors, your employees. All of my employees are investors, interestingly enough, right? So many of them have been with me so long that we certainly offer them the opportunity. Yes, they get their stock options, they get their participation, but they also participate as investors. They have investor rights, including communication rights. I let a bunch of them observe on board calls. I mean, again, you're going to work this hard and it's going to be this risky. At a minimum, over the family dinner table, you want to be informed. So to answer your question, the financing proposal that I get, and it either doesn't work or I don't receive the money and I need to move on. The net of it is I'm taking it far less personally as I go along, perhaps than I used to. So you want that emotional connection. You asked a question before about where do you draw the line. You want to be passionate, you want to be dedicated, but you have to understand that some of these things are out of your control. I think you have to be a little bit more zen about the business you're building, about the life you're leading. And again, I think what's going on in the world, especially the last 6 months, is forcing many more people in the world to understand that and to realize that life is just very uncertain at times.
Awesome. Yes. And I actually want to jump into some questions about your time in CrowdOptics. But before that, real quick, you're also big on not burning off the bridges, especially with those who do not see things the same way as you do. Now, coming on from that, I'm sure there's been multiple occasions. This is something that I've seen a lot, and a lot of our viewers have seen a lot, which is some of the co-founders, they tend to leave, they tend to start up their own projects to kind of be a competitor to the original one, or besides that, some with personal interests into the game. So I guess the question is, how do you deal with co-founders who do not see the same way? That's the first. And second, being, instead of not burning down the bridge, what's the best way to deal with these kinds of, so to speak, co-founders who don't see things the same way?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think first, again, we are, especially the newest generation, is institutionalizing that breaking eggs, lawsuits. Facebook made this, famous, and how that splintered. I just think it's wholly unnecessary. I tell my business school students, don't get into that. Don't get divorced. Marry the right person and find the right co-founder. And that sounds easy. But this is my fourth venture, and I've never had not only a co-founder issue, but never really had an employee issue. I've had employees, get cute, and we've had to go back and forth a little bit. But as I said, no lawsuits, no rock throwing through windows, nothing crazy. I think you can live your life trying to attract more of that than not. So what's one pattern? Well, my co-founders in the last venture, the Oracle transaction, we carved out our equity over a couple of Jamba juices at on the Stanford campus. We were there for 45 minutes, and I proposed an equity structure, and everyone finished their juice, and we shook hands, and we never talked about it again. And in the end, that was millions and millions of dollars that we decided in that meeting. But to answer your question, if that meeting had been contentious and had gone on for weeks and had been problematic, just like a marriage, just all your viewers can relate to this. If you get into a relationship and it's hard in the beginning, when you guys are just supposed to be walking around and it's rainbows, I mean, you're going to have children and bulldogs and sickness and parents and the rest of it. If you can't manage, the first time of it, all it's going to do, I think, is get a lot worse. So I've had some very romantic goings on with my the invention stage of sitting in that Starbucks, proverbially or otherwise, and coming up with ideas and working with co-founders and then sorting out the equity and who's going to do what. And yeah, it just needs to click. I would strongly encourage your current and future, co-founders. There's the adage that you should make sure to team up. If you're a business guy, find a tech guy. If you're a tech guy, find a business guy. I don't even know if there's a recipe for that. You want to round the bases and you want to be able to have your core competencies. But I think much more important is that you guys, if you don't have to be existing friends, you don't have to be this, but you're sitting in a room and things are working. And just like a relationship, if things are not working out of the gate, before you sign up, I think you should really, talk with each other and say, well, why isn't this working? If you have to take a month to negotiate the equity holdings, maybe that's worked in some teams that built, the fantastic companies. But in every one of mine and in many stories that I know, the guys got together and they carved it out. And, there's a famous saying that no one complains about, you can paraphrase, being generous or leaving some money on the table or equity division. No one complains, at least mostly in a successful event. The complaining is when you fail and you don't get there and you're blaming. But if you gave away an extra 5% equity that came out of your pocket and you guys all connected with the ball and you all won, you can make it up the next time, but if that helped get you there, I think that's a good thing. So I would strongly recommend that your audience is taking into account how things are going, how zen it is, and is this really working to the tune of, are we going to be able to work it out when things don't go well? And then you also asked a question about co-founders leaving. If you're starting at the gate and you're doing something and then it materializes that you're going to leave, I think something was systemically wrong. It's easy to armchair that, but by definition, I mean, if you're getting at the gate, whether you're in the middle of your career, you're beginning of your career, and you're ready to do this, something's going on with your DNA and your mindset that maybe something went very wrong in order for you to have that change of heart. So I really think that people can sense these things, and I think you can get together with good teams, good initial employees, so that you can avoid that.
Gotcha. Awesome. Cool. And I want to switch gears a little bit now. If you don't mind to switch into a little bit about your time at CrowdOptic. Throughout the years, you've been innovating a lot, lots of new technologies, lots of new ideas, patents. And recently, CrowdOptic has been working a lot with medical frontliners, especially throughout the pandemic, helping with live streaming, triangulation, and all of that cool stuff. So when things of this nature, when things of tech come into play, things have to go on really fast. Improvements have to be made. Delays cannot be, accepted. So how do you constantly adapt? How do you constantly kind of jump towards the game and be on the front line, be the number one? Is there like a particular goal standard that you set for yourself, or is it more of the industry's demands that has to be met?
Yeah, well, the first thing that I do that makes it easier is I build enterprise and enterprise software companies versus the consumer side. Building a consumer company, I've read, must be I've invested in a couple, but I really didn't follow them closely. It must be like trying to build a hit Hollywood movie or sitcom or whatever. I mean, it's very difficult, right? But with the enterprise, you can get close to these strategic customers. I've written a book that you have to read in a couple business schools about it, and
yes,
you have
absolutely.
You have a customer that can really is reputable enough and rich enough and technologically discerning enough, and you get close to this client. In my former venture, it was Wells Fargo. In the venture before that, it was Home Depot. In this venture, it is some of the largest med tech companies in the world. I won't name the one I think it is because the venture has to sort of conclude before you print that it was due to that client. But we have 6 of the 8 top medical device companies in the world, and we are now shipping anti-virus, not in the McAfee terms, not software, but anti-COVID-19 responses, meaning this remote training medtech platform, to 3 now of the top 5 and many of the others. So but let me crystallize it for your viewers. U.S. patent 8527340 is the best idea that I've ever come up with. It was the time, if not the only time. I have this 10-year-old I mentioned when she was just starting to walk. First-time fathers, new fathers. It's a science that chemicals are released in the brain. You have these seminal moments, and so I witnessed her walking. That's one of the greatest things going. And within a day, I had this idea. Now, maybe it's correlated, maybe not, but I think it's safe to say I was smarter than I am now but before. I mean, it was a very important time. I've come up with different ideas that have become companies, different ideas that become patents, as you mentioned. But this one, most of what I've done has been iterative. You look at something and you improve it. This came from the heavens. This was a new form of triangulation. Now, Pythagoras started that, and when I was born, GPS was another iteration of that. That's a pretty good form of triangulation, and few and far between, but you don't have every day that you invent a new form of triangulation. And so to answer your question, I had that. I knew that could solve a variety of problems in a variety of different markets in terms of how cameras could work together with this new form of triangulation. We could, multiple camera angles could work in a way to make sports and entertainment more granular, more efficient, in a way that smart cities could follow an anomaly through a city in a faster and new way. We tried all that, and we productized and all that. But in the end, by working closely with these medical device companies, we found that multiple angles of surgeries were the place that this should manifest. Now, I just mentioned three radical what are called pivots, or what are called different industries. And people look at a pivot and they think that, well, a lot of people, either they're in this business or not, you got something wrong, or you made a mistake. I mean, you have an idea, you have a market, you do whatever research you can, you jump in, but almost everything changes and adapts, as you said. So I think one of the keys is to get close to your strategic clients, those that can really help you build best of breed software, and they're going to help pull you to where you need to go. So we got close to all kinds of beguiling situations. We deployed this stuff, multiple cameras in the Denver Broncos stadium when they were winning the AFC Championship game. And then John Elway looks at this. My father was John Elway's thesis advisor at Stanford. I mean, the whole world is a small place. I'd never met him. And all of a sudden you build something and he lights up, and he actually invested in the company, and we were doing some cool things. But in the end, that's not where we belonged. We belonged across the street doing this for the largest med tech devices in hospitals, in bioskills facilities. And so by looking in different places and having these clients pull us in different places, you find out where you belong. Now, a virus hits, creating this unprecedented Earth rotation towards us, and that is you're doing remote med tech training. It's not the sexiest thing I've ever done. It's just where my algorithm belonged. And all of a sudden, God forbid, this huge thing happens where society must now all go remote. Eric, who runs Zoom, he's probably the smartest guy in the space, is an investor and a new friend. And I've watched, what he's done in this crazy company, but he invested because you can't Zoom what we're doing with the multiple angles and some of the other things that we've honed over the years in this space. So we found where we were supposed to be. And then, of course, we reserve the right to get very lucky. I mean, this tragic thing happens to humankind, but yes, a terrific thing happens to our little software company that's needed. Now, there are massive headwinds. One of our key strategic partners and a huge bucket of our revenue comes from in-person training, because our stuff is used to bring in people remotely to that in-person training. That got shut off. So, we've had all kinds of headwinds too, but strategically, something like this happened, and it becomes a major boon for our initial vision.
Right. Great. I was actually interested in asking you about the training parts. Since this kind of technological advancements require high amounts of training, especially when it relates to the medical field, as you mentioned, how do you, sort of keep the high levels of accuracy? It's different when it's coming from an inventor, it's coming from the company who made it, but it's also difficult for someone brand new who's used to the old versions to adapt. So how do you see that, especially in our industry, our ever-evolving remote industry like?
Yes, and I'm sorry, you said high levels of what?
Accuracy.
Yes. So interestingly enough, when you have this triangulation that allows cameras to work together in new ways, to share views, to hone in on like views, and to collaborate, you were looking for more spectacular vistas. For example, in sports, stadiums have cameras all around the perimeter of a stadium, and you put this algorithm to work, and all of a sudden the cameras can capture never before seen perspectives, multiple angles. In surgery, though, the way it so happens, you mentioned this need, is that the algorithm is helping everything from quality of service or multiple views if some camera goes down or if someone walks in front of a camera. So in one industry, you're providing the multiple views for greater granularity, but in this industry, you're providing the multiple views for greater accuracy, for greater uptime, for greater perspective. And again, less sexy, because all it's really doing that is so blisteringly cutting edge is the 99.999% uptime. I mean, if you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on training, you're going to Zoom and it costs you $70. But here, you're training 200 surgeons and 150 sales guys, and it's your new robotics release that you spent $3 billion on. You get everyone together to train, and some are in facilities, some are in hospitals, some are online. That's this business. This stuff really, really has to work, and it has to work well. So you got 12 cameras operating. Our algorithm ensures that even if 10 of those cameras go down, we're going to know, and the other camera is going to pan around and everything else. So that's how it works in this particular field.
Awesome. There's a lot of stuff going on there, I would imagine. You make it sound so simple, especially like how it works, but I bet there's a lot of underlying tech that goes along with it. Well, Jon, we are almost approaching our time, but I'd like to slip in one more question here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So with a lot of things going on over here, dealing with medical, dealing with tech, dealing with your company, with your employees, how is like a typical day in your life? Like, how do you balance off between time at work and time with family, and sort of conclude the day coming back to your 10-year-old daughter, coming back to your family?
Well, one thing I mentioned in the speech is that as we were going to school in person, I don't think we're doing that in the fall, but for years past, my daughter and I, and now Bulldog, would climb on an electric tandem bicycle first thing in the morning, and we would drive from the house on this bicycle to school a few miles away, and we're able to get to school faster going 20 miles an hour on an electric bike in the bike lane versus having to deal with traffic. And I think a point in the speech that really resonates with a lot of people is I said, you have these incredibly resourceful and well-meaning people who live here, and they won't change their driving habits at all in order to get their children to school. And if they won't sacrifice a little for that, like wearing masks, for example, how are we going to sacrifice a lot to save the planet? So my day starts out with an idea like that. And this is not just a normal electric tandem bike. It's one where we sit side by side. I'd happy to send you a picture of that or a video of that for your viewers. I won't believe it. It's called an Orion, and it's customized, and it's out of Denmark, and it's a crazy vehicle, but it works, and I can sit next to her and we can talk, and then the Bulldog is on our lap. And so we get through the traffic jam. That's how my day starts. And then I'm on an engineering call, and then I'm on a sales call, and someone inevitably almost on every one of my calls will be late or will say that something's going on with one of their children, and we have that embedded in the company. A lot of the people in the company since I started are my age because we started at the same time, but others are older, others are younger. We have institutionalized in this company that family comes first. So someone will have a hockey game or someone will be in the hospital, and no one asks any questions. So if that's happening, you go do that. I don't like to mention it. I don't like to incorporate family in the business activities, but everyone knows that if it's taking 20 minutes to get a hold of me, I may be embroiled in something. So we sprinkle that family and that dynamic in the culture. And then the day goes on. I'm talking to some clients. I'm talking to some partners. I'm talking to some investors. Yesteryear, I was taking these meetings and driving around. And these days, it's more like this on the video conference, of course. And then really at the end of the day, my wife and I, before our daughter used to eat very late. She's also an entrepreneur. She owns clothing boutiques downtown. Right, yes. So, but now we eat early and we eat together, and we're always talking about our day. And perhaps we'll watch a sitcom or a movie or read a book and newspaper together, whatever it is. But we come together at the end of the day. Doesn't sound groundbreaking. It doesn't sound like something that every single viewer that's listening to this couldn't practice. But in the end, and I think this is really a salient point, the whole world is being forced to now act, I think, in a way that we've really embedded in our company. You couldn't leave the house for a certain amount of time. And now even that, most companies are in the Valley are saying you can come back when you want or teleport in or do this. So this virus struck and really changed the culture to force us, I think, to embed family in our overall work environment. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you see thousands of entrepreneurs, inventors building their companies in this way, in the future. And in the end, I just watched an interesting speech I hadn't seen before. It's a young kid saying he became the valedictorian and was excited for the first 15 seconds of that nature. And then it was the 16th second that it felt hollow, that he had really sacrificed too many relationships to be at the top of his class. And he realized that it wasn't worth it to sacrifice. And that's pretty good to understand that, I think, at that age. Failure, if you have to go through it, I would recommend against it. Building something too large and losing control of it. I mean, there are a lot of cliches to the Valley, but in the end, my day is usually not spent away from my wife, my daughter, our little dog, friends and family, and I am building. Be damned. If I'm going to lose an extra bit of the quarter, an extra bit of investment capital, an extra bit of fame, or whatever you hold dear in this business that you're trying to achieve, I'll leave that by to the side of the road, just like I do on that tandem bicycle, leave the traffic on the side of the road, or whatever the traditional society thing that says that we should be chasing in order to have this the time and experience. We've been 6 months of this virus. We don't know how long it's going to continue. I focused on one thing with our little girl this summer. She's 10 years old, as I've mentioned repeatedly. She became diving certified, first in Monterey, and then altitude certified in Lake Tahoe. 10 years old is the minimum age in the U.S. that you can get diving certified. It takes 10 hours in school, takes 10 hours in the pool. She's had to do 6 open ocean dives. It's been this major experience, but she's been able to bite down on it and experience another world. And I'll challenge all your listeners who are thinking that the world is never going to change or never going to change back, and we're in this crazy new normal. Take them under the ocean. I mean, take them on a bicycle to avoid the traffic. Whatever little thing that you can do to bypass what you think are all these obstacles or terrible things around us with your family is the most important thing of all.
Nicely said, John. There. And first of all, massive congratulations to your daughter there. That must not have been easy. I have no idea how much of work she's put into that.
Brave little creature, yeah.
She's definitely growing up into an amazing young woman. I can already see that. Well, thank you so much for your time. I want to be a bit mindful of your time too. And I'm sure all of our listeners and our viewers have a lot to gain. And something that's really priceless besides anything instructional is something to do with the mind and the way that we see the world, the way that we structure the world. And I think that time and time again, throughout the years, consistently, you've always delivered that. And I'm super grateful to have the privilege to be able to speak to you today, Jon.
Thank you very much. It was a privilege to be included as well. I hope someone will watch something that gives them a little more hope. It is a increasingly unrecognizable world that we're living in. But my trajectory, as I said, should be recognizable to anyone listening, anyone viewing.
Absolutely. All right. So please take care, and wishing nothing short of the best for you and for your daughter, for your bulldog, and as well as for your family. Take care. And to our viewers, you can find all of the necessary links down in the description, together with Jon's book, and as well as all of his other ventures. And please stay safe, take care. And this is Bushaga with Jon Fisher signing off.
Thank you very much.